There's a silence that isn't chosen, it's inherited. And in Pachinko, it passes down from father to son to grandson. And nobody ever puts it down. This is the Literary Tailor, the podcast edition, where we have great books and even better conversations. I am Zach. I am the host of this podcast, as well as the host of the YouTube channel, The Literary Tailor, where I talk about more broader books and subjects. But in this podcast, I like to deep dive even more into these details. And today is actually one of my favorite books I've read in a long time, and that is Pachinko. Pachinko is about a following a Korean family through generations upon generations, from poverty times in Korea in like early 1900s, all the way up till one of them moves to the U.S. just for a little bit, and we also learn how they lived their lives in Japan as well in a rather terrible and turmoil times that they had to experience with both being a war and also to be discriminated against for being Korean as well. The silence in this book, the silence these men that I will be talking about, speaks volumes that echoes throughout the book just with their silence alone. It's not a weakness that these men show, it's just a wound that has no name on it. This episode, as much as I can talk about the women as well, and I will on the YouTube channel, this episode is about the men in Pachinko. And I've decided that one episode to talking about Pachinko, it just isn't enough. So this is just episode one of talking about a heavy, detailed, and emotional book of Pachinko. And today, this first episode will be all about the men from Solomon, Noah, Moses, pretty much all the men that had a history of a story that left me kind of wondering and left me speechless as I read this book, and followed these men through their lives from their birth and sometimes all the way to their deaths. So, let's get into Pachinko. Just to give you a quick idea about Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. This book follows a woman named Sanja as we follow her through generations, starting with her father all the way to her grandson. Sanja remains like a cornerstone or the glue of his family, and we follow her through the most tragic times as well as the triumphant. We, as a reader, start to realize how strong Sanja is. But this episode's about the men that are involved in her life, whether it be her father, her lover, her son, and even her grandson. What this author doesn't just show how this family lives, it gives us more of a forensic examination of what silence truly is. Rather, it would be from Sandra herself, the other women involved in the story, well, some of them, or even the men that have to remain silent because the truth might just be as painful or even more painful than they can even imagine. Because here's what I noticed when I was reading this story: the men aren't just quiet because they don't have fear. Well, some of them actually do have fear. They're just quiet because the world wants them to be quiet and just to live their lives as accordingly and as a fashioned way, as you will, for them to continue living this life. Rather, they have to be the provider of the family, or just to be a better version of that family in the next generation by continuing education, having a better job, just having a better life overall that their family members never had the opportunity, such as education, such as having an amazing job, or just having a new experience like actually moving or even living in the United States for short periods of time. They're quiet because the world never gives them a language for what they feel on the inside. These are what the men and the women have to experience, and us as reader, as we follow these important characters that grow within us as we continue reading the story. We start to understand these characters a lot better throughout the story. The first man we're going to talk about is Isak. When we first meet Isak, he's just a stranger that happens to show up to Sanja and her mother's boarding house, if you will, where they provide a service of boarding as well as food for travelers or anyone that needs boarding. This family provides. Isaac decides, oh, not decides, but just happens to show up. Uh, Pretty much enters the lives of both Sanja and her mother. Isaac, I'm not going to go into full details, but he's a preacher, a traveling preacher from Japan, and just happens to visit during this time. But what happens to Isaac quickly is he gets sick. He actually gets TB. So Sanja and her mother help heal him so he can travel home back to Osaka, where his brother resides. And we'll talk about his brother later on as well. But what Isaac does is truly something really remarkable. I'm not going to get into full details, but he ends up playing a big role in Sandra's life because he becomes her husband. And one of the biggest acts of sacrifice, something I don't think a lot of people might not even do, is he accepts a child that's not even his. He treats Sanja's son as his own and raises him to be as his own. So much so that his son, stepson, if you will, Noah, that's who I'm referring to, gains the traits that Isaac possesses, such as education, loving for reading, all because of Isaac's raising of him. He also knows that Noah isn't, how should I say this? Well, he's a bastard, if you will. I'm not going to go into the full details on how that, because I think that's another issue for another time, another episode. But Isaac becomes a father figure for Noah, despite him not being his own. However, Isaac is thrown into a prison camp. He didn't do anything wrong. He just happens to practice a religion that really isn't good to do during this time in Japan, during World War II. He was just thrown into a prison just because of that. And he spent most of his life, or remaining part of it, in prison, unknowingly missing out on Sanja, Noah, and even his own son, Moses. Just to give you an idea, because Koreans at this time weren't treated as civilized, if you will, by Japan during this era. It was really ruthless. Bullying was really cutthroat in schools. And on the outside, it's just as bad. So for Isaac, he had to be thrown into a prison, all just because that he's a practicing preacher. He's a young man too, so he was just thrown away with along with his whole church into a prison where just to put it lightly, it wasn't a good happy ending for any of them. But he possesses such a love for Sanja Noah, and his other son Moses, as well as just his whole family, from his brother to his sister in law. He possesses such a love that can almost be remarkable, that truly what transpires for him, that translate into such a caring role that he has as a man as well. So it feels like something different to see a man like Isaac be such a nurturing figure, as because when we think of this as and within a man, it's not as common. But he loves his family with no words that could describe the love he has for them. He ends up dying because of not because of this love, but it helps in a way. It helps him ease into a new, well, is it helps him phase out into his death in the end. Isaac loved his family is the only language left him. And that language had no words, but the word of true love. And this is what Isaac represented in this story. As I mentioned, Sandra had a bastard son, unfortunately. Uh, just to put it lightly, she had an affair with a married man. That's pretty much how it became a bastard situation, if you will. Almost like Jon Snow, in a way, I guess. Her son is Noah. Noah becomes such an important figure, obviously her first son, but he possesses such a incredible gift of intelligence, wanting for education, wanting just to learn. He involves himself in so many readings, and he often has books of like Charles Dickens and a lot of great American authors at this time, as well as some British and other English authors. Noah always had a book with him or had a book on him ready to learn its new information, so he can uh, upset so he can gain these new information for himself, because again he wants to be better in the education when he learned from his stepfather in a way, Isaac. However, the past that Sandra almost puts on him becomes not unbearable, but it becomes, yeah, it is unbearable. It engulfs him in so much ways, because he when he learns the truth, he becomes a darker version of himself. He becomes more isolated from his family. He actually isolates his whole family. He doesn't even tell them where he even moves to, because he wants to put that part of him behind him in a way. Well, yeah, he still sends money to his mother, trying to help her out, but he doesn't want any more interactions with her or his father, especially his father, where he grows to hate. Despite his father unknowingly, because he didn't know who his father was, paid for his education in a way. Well, it paid for his education. But he tried to be invisible. He tried to cover up this lie that he was living. He decided that being Korean was a bad thing, I guess you will. But also being part of how should I say it? Well, his father was connected, if you will, kind of gangs connections. So this makes him wanting to be invisible even more serious for him. Becomes his own identity, where he cuts off everyone because of this tie his father has. He calls that almost like dirty blood in a way. He removes himself from the story, unfortunately, which makes when I read it a complete uh, world shattering for me. when I read what happened, I'm not going to reveal too much about Noah's story because I'm going to talk about Noah and his brother in another episode because their comparison as well as difference is to a bigger episode, a bigger, more detailed episode. Think deserves to be covered. Noah didn't disappear because he was weak. He disappeared because silence was the only home he ever had. When they took it from him, there was nowhere left to go for him, which kind of sealed his fate in the end. The next man we're going to talk about is Solomon. Solomon's the nephew of Noah. What Solomon represents is this youth at the end of the story. As we watch him grow from being the son of Moses, to his own man. He actually ends up living in America for a short period of time. He becomes a very talented businessman. He's good at poker and gambling, if you will. You can see him in a business suit. He worked at a bank, but that bank sort of does him dirty in the end, if you will. What Solomon possesses is Isaac's moral inheritance without Isaac's peace. He also possesses his uncle's Noah's shame, but he doesn't understand why he has to feel this shame. What Solomon does is possesses all these male characters' traits, but he doesn't understand why he has to feel this way, and why he has this different lens that, unlike a lot of men, as well as the women in his life, had to experience. He remains like this, not caught in a crosshair, but I guess in a way he is, but he is able to watch from a different lens compared to other family members, whether it be his grandmother, his uncle, his own father, as well as other people in his life. Solomon, is able to look at his grandmother, Sanja, and see that what everything she had to endure, that everything she had to experience from almost from the time she was born until she's very elderly. She is about like 80 or 60 by the end of the book. Well, what Solomon does is he's able to feel humbled, but he's also trapped by the same uh, blanket that this family has to continue wearing long after these events has passed them. What Solomon does is he has his own silence that is different from Noah, from his father, and from Isaac, and as well as from Sandra herself. What his silence is given, what his silence is, and how it's different is it's a silence of someone else who was never given the language to understand his own wound, his own identity, his own fear, his own masculinity. Pretty much, he has his not a blanket, but his almost written of a person that he has to be, I guess, in a way, and how to figure out how he can be his own man at the end of this book. The question that Min Jin Lee, the author, is asking through Solomon: does survival become identity? And if so, who survives? Does this identity, this feeling, this label, outlast someone's own life? Does this identity grows within the family itself, as it almost represents this family almost all its own? Does this family have this identity that's forever there, like a shadow, that's always nowhere no matter where you look, that identity will always be there. And Solomon is the person that this author explores this question is, does his identity follow us even though that these events might not even have happened yet? Or these events have happened, but they have long passed. But does that event and identity live longer with us even though long time has occurred? Solomon inherited everything his family survived and suffered, except the language to understand it. As mentioned, this is a 3-part episode of talking about Pachinko because just one episode just isn't enough. The men in Pachinko are not silent because they aren't strong. No, they are very strong, both emotionally and physically in a way. They are silent because they were never given the words. And somehow, and somewhere in this story, I think you recognize that the silence you've been carrying into, whether you can identify yourself within this family or in other ways. The question that Pachinko leaves you isn't whether you can break it, it's where it's rather you know whose silence you've been holding. What silence in your family, your own identity, that no one has ever named? Leave in the comments below because I would like to know. If this episode hits you in the heart, in the feels just a little bit, if you're sitting with a feeling and you don't know which story to reach for, that's exactly what the Literary Taylor podcast, as well the Literary Taylor YouTube channel is for. I also have the Literary Fitting, which I provide you a 3-book reading plan to help you understand yourself a little bit more, whether you're going through depression, uh, anxiety, anything, mental issue. I just provide you a slightly cheaper option than going to your local doctor for a prescription. I provide you the books that can help you in just some ways, just to help you ease that low anxiety just a little bit. The link of that has been the notes below for you to explore and look through your own time. As well as if this episode or this podcast is something that you really want to continue listening, or it just have this idea that connected with you just a little bit, please hit that subscribe button and be ready for the next episode. Of course, there'll be again about more men in Pachinko. I am Zach. This is the Literary Taylor, a podcast edition, where we have great books and even better conversations. Until then, guys, happy reading, and see you guys next Tuesday for Pachinko Part 2.